My father actually left when I was 2 years old, and my mom and dad ended up divorcing. And so there was a lot of years there, approximately 35, when in that period of time I only had two glances of my father. I was told that he stopped by my school when I was in the 8th grade. I don't have a good recall of that, but I was told that, and that I got a glance of him. And then when my wife and I first married, he actually stopped by the house one day with one of his wives, and not that he had more than one at the same time, but he had several throughout his lifetime. And we had a short visit, and then other than that, those were the only two sightings I had of him in approximately 35 years. Being a pastor for many, many years, you have great Sundays, and some Sundays are not so great. And I remember coming home one Sunday night from church, and my wife and I were getting ready to go to bed, and I was kind of emotional. Maybe it hadn't been a good day. I don't recall exactly. But I said, I don't really know what's wrong with me. And my wife said, well, I know what's wrong with you. Said, you haven't ever forgiven your father. And I'm ashamed of the response that I gave to her. I think I looked at her and said, you're a crazy woman, or something like that. But the key words were, I never ever think about him. And she said, that's my point exactly. You've stuffed this so far back in your memory, you've never dealt with him. So about 3 days went by, and the Holy Spirit used my wife's words to convict me, and I began a search for my father because I didn't know where he was. After about 6 months, I located him. I tracked a phone number down, and I decided to call him. When I made the phone call to my father, it seemed like forever before he came to the phone. It actually was only about a minute and a half. And when he came to the phone, about all he could say to me at that point was, how are you? And so we chatted for just a few moments, and then I did something that I knew I needed to do. I told him that the reason I called was to tell him that I forgave him for leaving myself and leaving my mom at the age of 2. Now, there was complete silence on the other end of the phone, and he really didn't respond to that at all. But for me, it was like almost £1,000,000 lifted off of my body. As a parent, this whole event of me forgiving my father affected me tremendously. I saw my children differently. Up to that point, I was modeling my stepdad's raising. I had a stepdad later on. I was modeling his raising of me, which was stern and harsh, and I was modeling that with my children. But I saw that completely change, and over time got better as the result of my forgiving them. I saw that my children needed forgiveness, and they needed compassion, and they needed love. And I'm not going to say I was a great dad, but it was a lot better after that event than it was prior to it. So we have 2 grandchildren, and we love them dearly. And watching our son parent his 2 children like that is such a joy, because I see him beginning at their early ages with a forgiving and a kind and loving spirit. And if we had to say anything about legacy, I would hope that that would be the legacy that would carry through to my grandchildren, and that my son, although he's the oldest child, would somehow or another remember those latter parenting days of his dad. And even as a dad now, times I've had to go to him and ask him to forgive me of some of the early mistakes I made as a dad.